Alrighty, welcome back to another thrilling installment of Free Read Fridays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fraggeth, and today we're going to keep reading from The Fall of Hyperion by Dan Simmons. Previously on, what happened last time? Oh yeah, our boy John Keats is on his way to Hyperion um, to see what things are like firsthand. Also, not Father Paul de Rey, the other guy. Our priest died. He did. Finally, the Shrike slit his throat, as the Shrike is wont to do. Lenar Hoyt, thank you. I knew it was an H name. Um, Sorry about bumping the mic there. So yeah, things are moving along though, as are we. We are coming up on part 2 of the book. Actually, I don't know how many parts are in this particular novel off the top of my head. At least 4. 3. At least 3. There's part 3. Okay, cool. I don't know where part 4 is. Part 4 is probably like right at the end, I'd guess. If there is one. Oh boy, I am so looking forward to the climax of this book. It is going to be real interesting, and there are going to be parts of it that I'm not sure how I'm going to read them aloud, but we're going to find out. At any rate, last time was more a vibrant. Oh, right, and John Keats had been kidnapped by a bunch of dudes who were trying to figure out what he's doing, what his role is. Sorry about that. Sneezing at the most inappropriate time. It's because it's sunny out and I look too close. Anyway, oh, that's right. I get to do Theo Lane again. Nice. So yeah, we got a pretty thrilling installment this go round. Not a super long one, but long enough. I'm trying to keep them down 2 hours or less if I can, and then going from there. Fortunately, this one makes it easy as opposed to the last volume, which does not. Nice little chunklets. Keeps it so that my programming is easy and keeps it so that people don't have to tune in for 10 hours at a whack. Of course, it doesn't really matter after the fact, but you know. Anyway, this cover art here is one of the Japanese covers. I believe this one is also by Orai. Slash, what's his other name? Come on, where are you? Nope, that's something else entirely. That's hilarious news that I shared with someone who forgot to get rid of the tab for. Where are you? And then you just went right by it. Okay. That's cool. Anyway, now that I've completely lost it. Now I have to find it again. Cool. Bear with me. No. Oh, is that it? No. No, that's lightning that I had up. I have too many tabs. It's okay. Insight up. That's gone. Disadvantage of having so much processing power and freedom is that sometimes we abuse that freedom. Maybe I closed it. Oh well. Oh, I have it written down in one of the stream descriptions, I'm pretty sure. I just can't remember which one. Ah, there it is. Aha! Noriyoshi Ikuyori. There we go. Or Noriyoshi Orai. Noriyoshi Orai is the name I know him by, but I think his actual name is Ikuyori. At any rate, they're the one who did this cover and the last one. Unfortunately, the last one that I did was not the one I had intended to do. So we just have them flipped with next week's, I believe. I believe it's next week's. That's okay. Don't look too closely at this one. There's spoilers there. But his depiction of the Shrike in particular is rather excellent. It's got all four arms. There's a lot of depictions of the Shrike that don't have four arms, and I'm just like, it's right there. It's right there. They say it. It's got four arms. Then again, his I don't think has the giant chest spike that it's supposed to have, but I can't quite tell from that one. The image on my screen is rather small. Anyway, let's get cracking. I've yammered long enough, and yeah, be a couple chapters here of the Fall of Hyperion, of the Hyperion Cantos, by Dan Simmons. Chapter 11. I awoke just as the dropship touched down. Hyperion, I thought, still separating my thoughts from the tatters of dream. The young lieutenant wished us luck, and was the first out as the door irised open, and cool, thin air replaced the pressurized thickness of the cabin atmosphere. I followed Hunt out and down a standard docking ramp, through the shield wall, and onto the tarmac. It was night, and I had no idea what the local time was, whether the Terminator had just passed this point on the planet or was just approaching, but it felt and smelled late. It was raining softly, a light drizzle perfumed with the salt scent of the sea and the fresh hint of moistened vegetation. Field lights glared around the distant perimeter, and a score of lighted towers threw halos toward the low clouds. A half-dozen young men in marine field uniforms were quickly unloading the dropship, and I could see our young lieutenant speaking briskly to an officer 30 yards to our right. The small spaceport looked like something out of a history book, a colonial port from the earliest days of the Hegira. Primitive blast pits and landing squares stretched for a mile or more toward a dark bulk of hills to the north. Gantries and service towers tended to a score of military shuttles and small warcraft around us, and the landing areas were ringed by modular military buildings, sporting antennae arrays, violet containment fields, and a clutter of skimmers and aircraft. I followed Hunt's gaze and noticed a skimmer moving toward us. The blue and gold geodesic symbol of the hegemony on one of its skirts was illuminated by its running lights. Rain streaked the forward blisters and whipped away from the fans in a violent curtain of mist. The skimmer settled, a perspex blister split and folded, and a man stepped out and hurried across the tarmac toward us. He held out his hand to Hunt. Hunt. I'm Theo Lane." Hunt shook the hand, nodded toward me. "Pleased to meet you, Governor General. This is Joseph Severn." I shook Lane's hand, a shock of recognition coming with the touch. I remembered Theo Lane through the déjà vu mists of the consul's memory, recalling the years when the young man was the vice-consul, also from a brief meeting a week earlier when he greeted all of the pilgrims before they departed upriver on the levitation barge Benares. He seemed older than he had appeared just 6 days before. But the unruly lock of hair on his forehead was the same, as were the archaic eyeglasses he wore, and the brisk, firm handshake. "I am pleased you could take the time to make planetfall," Governor General Lane said to Hunt. "I have several things I need to communicate to the CEO." "That's why we're here," said Hunt. He squinted up at the rain. "We have about an hour. Is there somewhere we can dry off?" The Governor-General showed a youthful smile. "The field here is a madhouse, even at 0520 hours, and the consulate is under siege. But I know a place." He gestured towards the skimmer. As we lifted off, I noticed the 2 marine skimmers keeping pace with us, but I was still surprised that the Governor-General of a protectorate world flew his own vehicle and did not have constant bodyguards. Then I remembered what the consul had told the other pilgrims about Theo Lane, about the young man's efficiency and self-effacing ways, and realized that such a low profile was in keeping with the diplomat's style. The sun rose as we lifted off from the spaceport and banked toward town. Low clouds glowed brilliantly as they were lighted from below. The hills to the north sparkled a bright green, violet, and russet, and the strip of sky below the clouds to the east was that heart-stopping green and lapis which I remembered from my dreams. Hyperion, I thought, and felt a thick tension and excitement catch in my throat. I leaned my head against the rain-streaked canopy and realized that some of the vertigo and confusion I felt at that moment came from a thinning of the background contact with the datasphere. The connection was still there, carried primarily on microwave and fat-line channels now, but more tenuous than I had ever experienced. If the datasphere had been the sea in which I swam, I was now in shallow water indeed. Perhaps a tidal pool would be a better metaphor, and the water grew even shallower as we left the envelope of the spaceport and its crude microsphere. I forced myself to pay attention to what Hunt and Governor-General Lane were discussing. "You can see the shacks and hovels," said Lane, banking slightly so he had a better view of the hills and valleys separating the spaceport from the suburbs of the capital. Shacks and hovels were 2 polite terms for the miserable collection of fiberplastic panels, patches of canvas, heaps of packing crates, and shards of flow foam that covered the hills and deep canyons. What obviously had once been a scenic 7 or 8 mile drive from the city to the spaceport through wooded hills now showed land stripped of all trees for firewood and shelter, meadows beaten to barren mudflats by the press of feet, and a city of 700,000 or 800,000 refugees sprawled over every flat piece of land in sight. Smoke from thousands of breakfast fires floated toward the clouds, and I could see movement everywhere, children running in bare feet, women carrying water from streams that must be terribly polluted, men squatting in open fields and waiting in line at makeshift privies. I noted that high razor-wire fences and violet containment field barriers had been set along both sides of the highway, and military checkpoints were visible every half-mile. Long lines of force-camouflaged ground vehicles and skimmers moved both directions along the highway and low-level flyways. "Most of the refugees are indigenes," Governor-General Lane was saying, "although there are thousands of displaced landowners from the southern cities and the large fiberplastic plantations on Aquila." "Are they here because they think the ousters will invade?" asked Hunt. Theo Lane glanced at Gladstone's aide. Originally, there was panic at the thought of the time tomb's opening, he said. People were convinced that the Shrike was coming for 'em. Was it? I asked. The young man shifted in his seat to look back at me. The 3rd Legion of the Self-Defense Force went north 7 months ago, he said. It didn't come back. You said at first they were fleeing the Shrike, said Hunt. Why did the others come? They're waiting for evacuation, said Lane. Everyone knows what the ousters and the hegemony troops did to Brescia. They don't want to be here when that happens to Hyperion. You're aware that Force considers evacuation an absolute last resort? Said Hunt. Yes, but we're not announcing that to the refugees. There have been terrible riots already. The Shrike Temple has been destroyed. A mob laid siege, and someone used shaped plasma charges stolen from the mineworks on Ursus. Last week there were attacks on the consulate and the spaceport, as well as the food riots in Jacktown. Hunt nodded and watched the city approach. The buildings were low, few over 5 stories, and their white and pastel walls glowed richly in the slanting rays of morning light. I looked over Hunt's shoulder and saw the low mountain with the carved face of sad King Billy brooding over the valley. The Hooley River twisted through the center of the old town, straightening before it headed northwest toward the unseen Bridle Range, twisting out of sight in the Weirwood marshes to the southeast, where I knew it widened to its delta along the high main. The city looked uncrowded and peaceful after the sad confusion of the refugee slums, but even as we began to descend toward the river, I noticed the military traffic, the tanks and APCs and GAVs at intersections and sitting in parks, their camouflage polymer deliberately deactivated so that the machines would look more threatening. Then I saw the refugees in the city, makeshift tents in the squares and alleys, thousands of sleeping forms along the curbs, like so many dull-colored bundles of laundry waiting to be picked up. Keats had a population of 200,000 2 years ago, said Governor-General Lane. Now, including the shack cities, we're nearing 3.5 million. I thought that there were fewer than 5 million people on the planet, said Hunt, including Indigenes. That's accurate, said Lane. You see why everything's breaking down. The other 2 large cities, Port Romance and Endymion, are holding most of the rest of the refugees. Fiber plastic plantations on Aquila are empty, being reclaimed by the jungle and flame forests. The farm belts along the Main and the Ninetails aren't producing, or if they are, they can't get their food to market because of the breakdown of the civilian transport system. Hunt watched the river come closer. What is the government doing? Theo Lane smiled. You mean what am I doing? Well, the crisis has been brewing for almost 3 years. The first step was to dissolve the Home Rule Council and formally bring Hyperion into the Protectorate. Once I had executive powers, I moved to nationalize the remaining transit companies and dirigible lines, only the military moves by Skimmer here now, and to disband the Self-Defense Force. Disband it? Said Hunt. I would think you would want to use it. Governor-General Lane shook his head. He touched the Omni control lightly, confidently, and the skimmer spiraled down toward the center of old Keats. They were worse than useless, he said. They were dangerous. I wasn't too upset when the fightin' 3rd Legion went north and just disappeared. As soon as the Force ground troops and Marines landed, I disarmed the rest of the SDF thugs. They were the source of most of the looting. And here's where we'll get some breakfast and talk. The skimmer dropped in low over the river, circled a final time, and dropped lightly to the courtyard of an ancient structure made of stone and sticks and imaginatively designed windows. Cicero's. Even before Lane identified the place to Leigh Hunt, I recognized it from the Pilgrim's Passage, the old restaurant/pub/inn lay in the heart of Jacktown and sprawled over 4 buildings on 9 levels, its balconies and piers and darkened weirwood walkways overhanging the slow-moving Hooley on one side and the narrow lanes and alleys of Jacktown on the other. Cicero's was older than the stone face of sad King Billy, and its dim cubicles and deep wine cellars had been the true home of the consul during his years of exile here. Stan Lueski met us at the courtyard. Okay, let's try this again. I'm sorry. Good morning, Warren. Thanks for tuning in. Stan Lueski met us at the courtyard door. Tall and massive, face as age-darkened and cracked as the stone walls of his inn, Lueski was Cicero's, as had been his father, grandfather, and great-grandfather before him. "By damn!" declared the giant, clapping the Governor-General / de facto dictator of this world on his shoulders hard enough to make Theo stagger. You get up early for a change, eh? Bring your friends to breakfast. Welcome to Cicero's." Stan Lueski's huge hand swallowed Hunt's, and then mine, in a welcome that left me checking fingers and joints for damage. Or is it later, web time for you?" he boomed. "Maybe you like a drink or dinner?" Leigh Hunt squinted at the pub owner. "How did you know we were from the web?" Lueski boomed a laugh that sent weather vanes on the roof lines spinning. Hard to deduct, yes? You come here with Theo at sunrise. You think he give everybody a ride here? Also wearing wool clothes when we got no sheeps here. You're not force people and not fiber plastic plantation big shots. I know all those. Ipso fact toto, you forecast 2 ships from Webb, drop down here for good food. Now, you want breakfast or plenty to drink? Theo... I love Stan. Stan's the best. Theo Lane sighed. "Give us a quiet corner, Stan. Bacon and eggs and brine kippers for me. Gentlemen?" "Just coffee," said Hunt. "Yes," I said. We were following the owner through the corridors now, up short staircases and down wrought iron ramps, through more corridors. The place was lower, darker, smokier, and more fascinating than I remembered from my dreams. A few regulars looked up at us as we passed, but the place was far less crowded than I remembered. Obviously, Lane had sent troops to throw out the last of the SDF barbarians who had been occupying the place. We passed a high, narrow window, and I verified that hypothesis by catching a glimpse of a force-ground APC parked in the alley, troops lounging on and near it with obviously loaded weapons. "Here," said Lueski, waving us into a small porch which overhung the Hooley and looked out onto the gabled rooftops and stone towers of Jacktown. "Dummy be here in 2 minutes with your breakfast and coffees." He disappeared quickly, for a giant. Hunt glanced at his comlog. "We have about 45 minutes before the dropship is supposed to return with us. Let's talk." Oh, sorry. "We have about 45 minutes before the dropship is supposed to return with us. Let's talk." Lane nodded, removed his glasses, and rubbed his eyes. I realized that he had been up all night, perhaps several nights. "Fine," he said, setting the glasses back in place. "What does CAO Gladstone want to know?" Hunt paused while a very short man with parchment-white skin and yellow eyes brought our coffee in deep, thick mugs and set down a platter with Lane's food. "The CEO wants to know what you feel your priorities are," said Hunt, "and she needs to know if you can hold out here if the fighting is prolonged." Lane ate for a moment before responding. He took a long sip of coffee and stared intently at Hunt. It was real coffee from the taste of it, better than most web-grown. "First question last," Lane said. "Define prolonged." "Weeks." "Weeks? Probably. Months? No way." The Governor-General tried the brine kippers.
You see the state of our economy. If it wasn't for the supplies dropped in by force, we'd have food riots every day instead of once a week. There are no exports with the quarantine. Half the refugees want to find the Shrike Temple priests and kill them. The other half want to before the Shrike finds them.
Have you found the priests?
Asked Hunt. No. We're sure they escaped the temple bombing, but the authorities can't locate them. Rumor has it that they've gone north to Keep Kronos, a stone castle right above the high step where the time tombs are. I knew better. At least, I knew the pilgrims had not seen any Shrike Temple priests during their brief stay in the keep, but there had been signs of slaughter there. As for our priorities, Theo Lane was saying, the first is evacuation. The second is elimination of the ouster threat. The third is help with the Shrike scare. Leigh Hunt sat back against oiled wood. Steam lifted from the heavy mug in his hands.
Evacuation is not a possibility at this time.
Why? Lane fired the question like a hell-whip bolt.
CEO Gladstone does not have the political power, at this point, to convince the Senate and all thing that the Web can accept 5 million refugees.
Ah, bullshit, said the Governor-General. There were twice that many tourists flooding Maui Covenant its first year in the Protectorate, and that destroyed a unique planetary ecology. Put us on Armagast or some desert world until the war scare is past. Hunt shook his head. His basset-hound eyes looked sadder than usual.
It isn't just the logistical question, he said, or the political one. It's
the Shrike, said Lane. He broke a piece of bacon. The Shrike is the real reason.
Yes, as well as fears of an ouster infiltration of the Web.
The Governor-General laughed. So you're afraid that if you set up forecaster portals here and let us out, a bunch of 3-meter ousters are going to land and get in line without anyone noticing? Hunt sipped his coffee.
No, he said, but there is a real chance of an invasion. Every Farcaster portal is an opening to the Web. The Advisory Council warns against it.
All right, said the younger man, his mouth half full. Evacuate us by ship, then. Wasn't that the reason for the original task force?
That was the ostensible reason, said Hunt. Our real goal now is to defeat the ousters and then bring Hyperion fully into the Web.
And what about the Shrike threat then?
It will be neutralized, said Hunt.
He paused while a small group of men and women passed by our porch. I glanced up, started to return my attention to the table, and then snapped my head back around. Sorry, let's try that sentence again, shall we? I glanced up, started to return my attention to the table, and then snapped my head back around. The group had passed out of sight down the hallway. Wasn't that Emilio Arundez? I said, interrupting Governor-General Lane. What? Oh, Dr. Arundez. Yes. Do you know him, M. Severn? Leigh Hunt was glaring at me, but I ignored it. Yes, I said to Lane, although I had never actually met Arundez. What is he doing on Hyperion? His team landed over 6 local months ago with a project proposal from Rijksuniversity on Freeholm to do additional research on the time tombs. But the tombs were closed to research and tourists, I said. Yes, but their instruments, we allow data to be relayed weekly through the consulate fatline transmitter, had already shown the change in the anti-entropic field surrounding the tombs. Rijksuniversity knew that the tombs were opening, if that's really what the change means, and they sent the top researchers in the Web to study it. But you did not grant them permission? I said. Theo Lane smiled without warmth. CEO Gladstone did not grant them permission. The closure of the tombs is a direct order from TC². If it were up to me, I would have denied the pilgrims passage and allowed Dr. Arundez's team priority access. He turned back to Hunt. Excuse me, I said, and slipped out of the booth. I found Arundez and his people, 3 women and 4 men, their clothing and physical style suggesting different worlds in the web, 2 porches away. They were bent over their breakfasts and scientific comlogues, arguing in technical terms so abstruse as to leave a Talmudic scholar envious. "Dr. Arundez," I said. "Yes?" He looked up. He was 2 decades older than I remembered, entering middle age in his early 60s, but the strikingly handsome profile was the same, with the same bronzed skin, solid jaw, wavy black hair going only slightly grey at the temples, and piercing hazel eyes. I understood how a young female graduate student could have fallen quickly in love with him. Quickly fallen in love with him, sorry, switching my word order for no reason. "My name is Joseph Severn," I said. "You don't know me, but I knew a friend of yours, Rachel Weintraub." Arundez was on his feet in a second, offering apologies to the others, leading me by the elbow until we found an empty booth in a cubicle under a round window looking out on red-tiled rooftops. He released my elbow and appraised me carefully, taking in the web clothing. He turned my wrists over, looking for the telltale blueness of Poulsen treatments. "You're too young," he said, "unless you knew Rachel as a child." "Actually, it is her father I know best," I said. Dr. Arundez let out a breath and nodded. "Of course," he said. "Where is Saul? I've been trying to trace him for months through the consulate. The authorities on Hyperion will only say that he's moved." He gave me that appraising stare again. "You knew about Rachel's illness?" "Yes," I said. The Merlin sickness which had caused her to age backward, losing memories with each day and hour that passed. Melio Arundez had been one of those memories. "I know that you went to visit her about 15 standard years ago on Barnard's World." Arundez grimaced. "That was a mistake," he said. "I thought I would talk to Saul and Sarai. When I saw her—" He shook his head. "Who are you? Do you know where Saul and Rachel are now? It's 3 days until her birthday." I nodded. Her first and last birthday. I glanced around. The hallway was silent and empty except for a distant murmur of laughter from a lower level. "I'm here on a fact-finding trip from the CEO's office," I said. "I have information that Saul Weintraub and his daughter have travelled to the Time Tombs." Arundez looked as though I'd struck him in the solar plexus. "Here? On Hyperion?" He stared out at the rooftops for a moment. "I should have realized. Although Saul always refused to return here, but with Sarai gone—" He looked at me. "Are you in touch with him? Are they all right?" I shook my head. "There are no radio or datasphere links with them at present," I said. "I know that they made the trip safely. The question is, what do you know? Your team? Data on what is occurring at the Time Tombs might be very important to their survival." Melio Arundez ran his hand through his hair. "If only they'd let us go there! That damned stupid bureaucratic short-sightedness! You say you're from Gladstone's office. Can you explain to them why it's important for us to get there?" "I'm only a messenger," I said. "But tell me why it's so important, and I'll try to get the information to someone." Arundez's large hands cupped an invisible shape in midair. His tension and anger were palpable. For 3 years, the data was coming via telemetry in the squirts the consulate would allow once a week on their precious fatline transmitter. It showed a slow but relentless degradation of the anti-entropic envelope, the time tides, in and around the tombs. It was erratic, illogical, but steady. Our team was authorized to travel here shortly after the degradation began. We arrived about 6 months ago, saw data that suggested that the tombs were opening, coming into phase with now. But 4 days after we arrived, the instruments quit sending. All of them. We begged that bastard Lane to let us just go and recalibrate them, set up new sensors if he wouldn't let us go investigate in person. Nothing. No transit permission, no communication with the university, even with the coming of force ships to make it easier. We tried going upriver ourselves without permission, and some of Lane's marine goons intercepted us at Carla Locks and brought us back in handcuffs. I spent 4 weeks in jail. Now we're allowed to wander around Keats, but we'll be locked up indefinitely if we leave the city again. Arundez leaned forward. Can you help? I don't know, I said. I want to help the Weintraubs. Perhaps it would be best if you could take your team to the site. Do you know when the tombs will open? The time physicist made an angry gesture. If we had new data, he sighed. No, we don't know. They could be open already, or it could be another 6 months. When you say open, I said, you don't mean physically open. Of course not. The time tombs have been physically open for inspection since they were discovered 4 standard centuries ago. I mean open in the sense of dropping the time curtains that conceal parts of them, bringing the entire complex into phase with the local flow of time. By local, you mean? I mean in this universe, of course. And you're sure that the tombs are moving backward in time from our future? I asked. Backward in time, yes, said Arundez. From our future? We can't say. We're not even sure what the future means in temporal physical terms. It could be a series of sine wave probabilities or a decision branch megaverse or even. But whatever it is, I said, the time tombs and the Shrike are coming from there? The time tombs for certain. The time tombs are for certain, said the physicist. I have no knowledge of the Shrike. My own guess is that it's a myth fueled by the same hunger for superstitious verities that drives other religions. Even after what happened to Rachel, I said, you still don't believe in the Shrike? Emilio Arundez glowered at me. Rachel contracted Merlin's sickness, he said. It is an anti-entropic aging disease, not the bite of a mythical monster. Time's bite has never been mythical, I said, surprising myself with such a cheap bit of homespun philosophy. The question is, will the Shrike, or whatever power inhabits the time tombs, return Rachel to the local time flow? Arundez nodded and turned his gaze to the rooftops. The sun had moved into the clouds, and the morning was drab, the red tiles bleached of colour. Rain was beginning to fall again. And the question is, I said, surprising myself again, are you still in love with her? The physicist turned his head slowly, fixing me in an angry gaze. I felt the retort, possibly physical, build, crest, and wane. He reached into his coat pocket and showed me a snapshot holo of an attractive woman with greying hair and 2 children in their late teens. My wife and children, said Emilio Arundez. They're waiting on Renaissance Vector. He pointed a blunt finger at me. If Rachel were cured today, I would be 82 standard years old before she again reached the age she was when we first met. He lowered the finger, returned the holo to his pocket. And yes, he said, I'm still in love with her. Ready? The voice broke the silence a moment later. I looked up to see Hunt and Theo Lane in the doorway. The dropship lifts off in 10 minutes, said Hunt. I stood and shook hands with Emilio Arundez. I'll try, I said. Governor General Lane had one of his escort skimmers return us to the spaceport, while he went back to the consulate. The military skimmer was no more comfortable than his consulate machine had been, but it was faster. We were strapped and fielded into our web seats aboard the dropship before Hunt said, What was all that about with the... There we go. Sorry. Just had like a complete mental breakdown. Could, in the middle of the sentence, just everything stopped making sense. What was all that about with the physicist? Just renewing old ties with a stranger, I said. Hunt frowned. What did you promise him that you'd try? I felt the dropship rumble, twist, twitch and then leap as the catapult grid launched us skyward. I told him I'd try to get him in to visit a sick friend, I said. Hunt continued to frown, but I pulled out a sketchpad and doodled images of Cicero's until we docked at the jump ship 15 minutes later. It was a shock to step through the Farcaster portal into the executive nexus in Government House. Another step took us to the Senate gallery, where Mina Gladstone was still speaking to a packed house. Imagers and microphones carried her speech to the All-Thing and 100 billion waiting citizens. I glanced at my chronometer. It was 10:38 hours. We had been gone only 90 minutes. Chapter 12. The building housing the Senate of the hegemony of man was patterned more after the United States Senate building of 8 centuries earlier, rather than the more imperial structures of the North American Republic or the First World Council. The main assembly room was large, girded with galleries, and big enough for the 300-plus senators from the web worlds and more than 70 non-voting representatives from protectorate colonies. Carpets were a rich wine red, and radiated from the central dais where the President pro tem, the Speaker of the All-Thing, and, today, the Chief Executive Officer of the hegemony, had their seats. Senators' desks were made of weirwood, donated by the Templars of God's Grove, who held such products sacred, and the glow and scent of burnished wood filled the room, even when it was as crowded as it was today. Leigh Hunt and I entered just as Gladstone was finishing her speech. I keyed my comlog for a quick readout. As with most of her talks, it had been short, comparatively simple, without condescension or bombast, yet laced with a certain lilt of original phrasing and imagery which carried great power. Gladstone had reviewed the incidents and conflicts that led to the current state of belligerency with the ousters, proclaimed the time-honoured wish for peace, which was still paramount in hegemony policy, and called for unity within the web and protectorate until this current crisis was past. I listened to her summation.
And so it has come to pass, fellow citizens, that after more than a century of peace we are once again engaged in a struggle to maintain those rights to which our society has been dedicated since before the death of our Mother Earth. After more than a century of peace, we must now pick up, however unwillingly, however distastefully, the shield and sword, which have ever preserved our birthright and vouchsafed our common good, so that peace may again prevail. We must not, and shall not, be misled by the stir of trumpets or the rush of near joy which the call to arms inevitably produces. Those who ignore history's lessons in the ultimate folly of war are forced to do more than relive them. They may be forced to die by them. Great sacrifices may lie ahead for all of us. Great sorrows may lie in store for some of us. But come what successes or setbacks must inevitably occur, I say to you now that we must remember these 2 things above all. First, that we fight for peace, and know that war must never be a condition, but rather a temporary scourge, which we suffer as a child does a fever, knowing that health follows the long night of pain, and that peace is health. Second, that we shall never surrender, or waver or bend to lesser voices or more comfortable impulses. Never waver until the victory is ours, aggression is undone, and the peace is won. I thank you.
Leigh Hunt leaned forward and watched intently as most of the senators rose to give Gladstone an ovation that roared back from the high ceiling and struck us in the gallery in waves. Most of the senators. I could see Hunt counting those who remained sitting, some with arms folded, many with visible frowns. The war was less than 2 days old, and already the opposition was building. First from the colonial worlds, afraid for their own safety while force was diverted to Hyperion, then from Gladstone's opponents, of which there were many, since no one stays in power as long as she without creating cadres of enemies, and finally from members of her own coalition, who saw the war as a foolish undoing of unprecedented prosperity. I watched her leaving the dais, shaking hands with the aged president and young speaker, and then taking the center aisle out, touching and talking to many, smiling the familiar smile. All thing imagers followed her, and I could feel the pressure of the debate net swell as billions voiced their opinions on the interact levels of the megasphere.
I need to see her now, said Hunt. Are you aware that you're invited to a state dinner tonight at Treetops?
Yes. Hunt shook his head slightly, as if incapable of understanding why the CEO wanted me around.
It will run late and she will be followed by a meeting.
Oh, sorry.
It will run late and will be followed by a meeting with Force Command. She wants you to attend both.
I'll be available, I said. Hunt paused at the door.
Do you have something to do back at Government House until the dinner?
I smiled at him. I'll work on my portrait sketches, I said. Then I'll probably take a walk through Deer Park. After that, I don't know. I may take a nap. Hunt shook his head again and hurried off. Chapter 13. The first shot misses Fedman Kassad by less than a meter, splitting a boulder he is passing, and he is moving before the blast strikes him. Rolling for cover, his camouflage polymer fully activated, impact armor tensed, assault rifle ready, visor in full targeting mode. Kassad lies there for a long moment, feeling his heart pounding and searching the hills, valley, and tombs for the slightest hint or heat or movement. Kassad lies there for a long moment, feeling his heart pounding and searching the hills, valley, and tombs for the slightest hint of heat or movement. Nothing. He begins to grin behind the black mirror of his visor. Whoever had shot at him had meant to miss, he is sure. They had used a standard pulse bolt, ignited by an 18mm cartridge, and unless the shooter was 10 or more kilometers away, there was no chance of a miss. Kassad stands up to run toward the shelter of the Jade Tomb, and the second shot catches him in the chest, hurling him backward. This time he grunts and rolls away, scuttling toward the Jade Tomb's entrance with all sensors active. The second shot had been a rifle bullet. Whoever is playing with him is using a force multi-purpose assault weapon similar to his own. He guesses that the assailant knows he is in body armor, knows that the rifle bullet would be ineffective at any range. But the multi-purpose weapon has other settings, and if the next level of play involves a killing laser, Kassad is dead. He throws himself into the doorway of the tomb. Still no heat or movement on his sensors except for the red and yellow images of his fellow pilgrims' footsteps, rapidly cooling, where they had entered the Sphinx several minutes before. Kassad uses his tactical implants to switch displays, quickly running through VHF and optical comm channels. Nothing. He magnifies the valley 100-fold, computes in wind and sand, and activates a moving target indicator. Nothing larger than an insect is moving. He sends out radar, sonar, and lorpho pulses, daring the sniper to home in on them. Nothing. He calls up tactical displays of the first 2 shots. Blue ballistic trails leap into existence. The first shot had come from the Poet's City, more than 4 clicks to the southwest. The second shot, less than 10 seconds later, came from the crystal monolith, almost a full click down the valley to the northeast. Logic dictates that there have to be two snipers. Kassad is sure that there is only one. He refines the display scale. The second shot had come from high on the monolith, at least 30 meters up on the sheer face. Kassad swings out, raises amplification, and peers through night and the last vestiges of the sand and snow storm toward the huge structure. Nothing. No windows, no slits, no openings of any sort. Only the billions of colloidal particles left in the air from the storm allow the laser to be visible for a split second. Kassad sees the green beam after it strikes him in the chest. He rolls back into the entrance of the jade tomb, wondering if the green walls will help deter a green light lance, while superconductors in his combat armor radiate heat in every direction, and his tactical visor tells him what he already knows. The shot has come from on high. The shot has come from high on the crystal monolith. Kassad feels pain sting his chest, and he looks down in time to see a 5-centimeter circle of invulnarmor. Yes, okay, I did read that correctly. And he looks down in time to see a 5-centimeter circle of invulnarmor drip molten fibers onto the floor. Only the last layer has saved him. As it is, his body drips with sweat inside the suit, and he can see the walls of the tomb literally glowing with the heat his suit has discarded. Biomonitors clamor for attention, but hold no serious news. His suit sensors report some circuit damage, but describe nothing irreplaceable, and his weapon is still charged, loaded, and operative. Kassad thinks about it. All of the tombs are priceless archaeological treasures, preserved for centuries as a gift to future generations, even if they are moving backward in time. It would be a crime on an interplanetary scale if Colonel Fedman Kassad were to put his own life above the preservation of such priceless artifacts. "Oh, fuck it," whispers Kassad, and rolls into firing position. He sprays laser fire high across the face of the monolith until crystal slags and runs. He pumps high explosive pulse bolts into the thing at 10-meter intervals, starting with the top levels. Thousands of shards of mirrored material fly out into the night, tumbling in slow motion toward the valley floor, leaving gaps as ugly as missing teeth in the building's face. Kassad switches back to wide-beam coherent light and sweeps the interior through the gaps, grinning behind his visor when something bursts into flames on several floors. Kassad fires bees, which is spelled B-H-E-E-S, beams of high-energy electrons, which rip through the monolith and plow perfectly cylindrical 14-centimeter wide tunnels for half a kilometer through the rock of the valley wall. He fires canister grenades, which explode into tens of thousands of needle flechettes after passing through the crystal face of the monolith. He triggers random pulse laser swaths, which will blind anyone or anything looking in his direction from the structure. He fires body heat-seeking darts into every orifice the shattered structure offers him. Kassad rolls back into the jade tomb's doorway and flips up his visor. Flames from the burning tower are reflected in the thousands of crystal shards scattered up and down the valley. Smoke rises into a night suddenly without wind. Vermilion dunes glow from the flames. The air is suddenly filled with the sound of wind chimes as more pieces of crystal break and fall away, some dangling by long tethers of melted glass. Kassad ejects drained power clips and ammo bands, replaces them from his belt, and rolls on his back, breathing in the cooler air that comes through the open doorway. He is under no illusion that he has killed the sniper. "Moneta," whispers Fedman Kassad. He closes his eyes a second before going on. Moneta had first come to Kassad at Agincourt on a late October morning in AD 1415. The fields had been strewn with French and English dead, the forest alive with the menace of a single enemy, but that enemy would have been the victor if not for the help of the tall woman with short hair and eyes he would never forget. After their shared victory, still dappled with the blood of their vanquished knight, Kassad and the woman made love in the forest. The Olympus Command School Historical Tactical Network was a stim-sim experience closer to reality than anything civilians would ever experience, but the phantom lover named Moneta was not an artifact of the stim-sim. Over the years, when Kassad was a cadet at Force Olympus Command School, and later, in the fatigue-drugged post-cathartic dreams that inevitably followed actual combat, she had come to him. Fedman Kassad and the shadow named Moneta had made love in the quiet corners of battlefields ranging from Antietam to Comriad. Unknown to anyone, unseen by other StimSim cadets, Moneta had come to him in the tropical nights on watch, enduring frozen days while under siege on the Russian steppes. They had whispered their passion in Kassad's dreams after nights of real victory on the island battle. Oh, geez, I have just completely lost the rhythm and cadence. We're going to take that from the top. My bad. I don't know what's going on there. Unknown to anyone, unseen by other StimSim cadets, Moneta had come to him in tropical nights on watch and during frozen days while under siege on the Russian steppes. They had whispered their passion in Kassad's dreams after nights of real victory on the island battlefields of Maui Covenant, and during the agony of physical reconstruction after his near death on South Brescia. And always Moneta had been his single love, an overpowering passion mixed with the scent of blood and gunpowder, the taste of napalm and soft lips and ionized flesh. Then came Hyperion. Colonel Fedman Kassad's hospital ship was attacked by ouster torch ships while returning from the Brescia system. Only Kassad had survived, stealing an ouster shuttle and crash landing it on Hyperion, on the continent of Equus, in the high deserts and barren wastelands of the sequestered lands beyond the Bridle Range, in the valley of the Time Tombs, in the realm of the Shrike. And Moneta had been waiting for him. They made love, and when the ousters landed in force to reclaim their prisoner, Kassad and Moneta and the half-sensed presence of the Shrike had laid waste to ouster ships, destroyed their landing parties, and slaughtered their troops. For a brief time, Colonel Fedman Kassad from the Tharsis slums, child and great-grandchild of refugees, citizen of Mars in every sense, had known the pure ecstasy of using time as a weapon, of moving unseen amongst one's enemies, of being a god of destruction in ways not dreamt of by mortal warriors. But then, even while making love after the carnage of battle, Moneta had changed, had become a monster. Or the Shrike had replaced her. Kassad could not remember the details, would not remember them if he did not have to in order to survive. But he knew that he had returned to find the Shrike and kill it. To find Moneta and to kill her. To kill her? He did not know. Colonel Fedman Kassad knew only that all the great passions of a passionate life had led him to this place and to this moment, and if death awaited him here, then so be it. And if love and glory and a victory that would make Valhalla quake awaited, then so be it. Kassad slaps down his visor, rises to his feet, and rushes from the jade tomb, screaming as he goes. His weapon launches smoke grenades and chaff toward the monolith, but these offer little cover for the distance he must cross. Someone is still alive and firing from the tower. Bullets and pulse charges explode along his path as he dodges and dives from dune to dune, from one heap of rubble to the next. Flechettes strike his helmet and legs. His visor cracks, and warning telltales blink. Kassad blinks away the tactical displays, leaving only the night vision aids. High-velocity solid slugs strike his armor and knee. Kassad goes down, is driven down. The impact armor goes rigid, relaxes, and he is up and running again, feeling the deep bruises already forming. His chameleon polymer works desperately to mirror the no man's land he is crossing. Night, flame, sand, melted crystal, and burning stone. 50 meters from the monolith, and ribbons of light lance to his left and right, turning sand to glass with a touch, reaching for him with a speed nothing and no one can dodge. Killing lasers quit playing with him and lance home, stabbing at his helmet, heart, and groin with the heat of stars. His combat armor goes mirror bright, shifting frequencies in microseconds to match the changing colors of attack. A nimbus of superheated air surrounds him. Microcircuits shriek to overload and beyond as they release the heat and work to build a micrometer-thin field of force to keep it away from flesh and bone. Kassad struggles the final 20 meters, using power assist to leap barriers of slagged crystal. Explosions erupt on all sides, knocking him down and then lifting him again. The suit is absolutely rigid. He is a doll thrown between flaming hands. The bombardment stops. Kassad gets to his knees and then to his feet. He looks up at the face of the crystal monolith and sees the flames and fissures and little else. His visor is cracked and dead. Kassad lifts it, breathes in smoke and ionized air, and enters the tomb. His implants tell him that the other pilgrims are paging him on all the comm channels. He shuts them off. Kassad removes his helmet and walks into darkness. It is a single room, large and square and dark. A shaft has opened in the center, and he looks up 100 meters to a shattered skylight. A figure is waiting on the 10th level, 60 meters above, silhouetted by flames. Kassad drapes his weapon over one shoulder, tucks his helmet under his arm, finds the great spiral staircase in the center of the shaft, and begins to climb.
Chapter 14.
Did you have your nap?
Leigh Hunt asked as we stepped onto the Farcaster reception area of Treetops. Yes.
Pleasant dreams, I hope? Pleasant dreams, I hope?
Said Hunt, making no effort to hide either his sarcasm or his opinion of those who slept while the movers and shakers of government toiled. Not especially, I said, and looked around as we ascended the wide staircase toward the dining levels. In a web where every town in every province of every country on every continent seemed to brag of a 4-star restaurant, where true gourmets numbered in the tens of millions and palates had been educated by exotic fare from 200 worlds, even in a web so jaded with culinary triumphs and restaurantic success, Treetops stood alone. Set atop one of a dozen something about that doesn't read right. Set atop one of a dozen highest trees on a world of forest giants. There's something about that that doesn't check out mentally for me. I don't know. Whatever. We'll read it as written and hope that it's right. Set atop one of a dozen highest trees on a world of forest giants, treetops occupied several acres of upper branches half a mile above the ground. let's try this sentence again. This sentence is causing me serious trouble. I don't know what's going on. Set atop one of a dozen highest trees on a world of forest giants, treetops occupied several acres of upper branches half a mile above the ground. The staircase Hunt and I ascended, 4 meters wide here, was lost amid the immensity of limbs the size of avenues, leaves the size of sails, and a main trunk, illuminated by spotlights and just glimpsed through gaps in the foliage, more sheer and massive than most mountain faces. Treetops held a score of dining platforms in its upper bowers, ascending in order of rank and privilege and wealth and power. Especially power. In a society where billionaires were almost commonplace, where a lunch at treetops could cost 1,000 marks and be within the reach of millions, the final arbiter of position and privilege was power, a currency that never went out of style. The evening's gathering was to be on the uppermost deck, a wide, curving platform of weirwood, since muir wood cannot be stepped upon, with views of a fading lemon sky, an infinity of lesser treetops stretching off to a distant horizon, and the soft orange lights of Templar tree homes and houses of worship glowing through far-off green and umber and amber walls of softly stirring foliage. There were about 60 people in the dinner party. I recognized Senator Kolchev, white hair shining under the Japanese lanterns, as well as Councillor Albedo, General Morpurgo, Admiral Singh, President Pro Tem Denzel Hyatamin, All Things Speaker Gibbons, and another dozen senators from such powerful... I got lost. Sorry. Getting old sucks. I don't know why I'm having trouble this week. So much trouble, I should say. There were about 60 people in the dinner party. I recognized Senator Kolchev, white hair shining under the Japanese lanterns, as well as Councillor Albedo, General Morpurgo, Admiral Singh, President Pro Tem Denzel Hyatamin, All Things Speaker Gibbons, another dozen senators from such powerful web worlds as Sol Draconi Septim, Deneb Dry, Nordholm, Fuji, both the Renaissances, Metaxas, Maui Covenant, Hebron, New Earth, and Ixion, as well as a bevy of lesser politicians. Spencer Reynolds, the action artist, was there, resplendent in a maroon velvet formal tunic, but I saw no other artists. I did see Tyrina Wingreen Fife across the crowded deck. The publisher turned philanthropist still stood out in a crowd. Yup, missed the intent there. Sorry. I hope this doesn't keep happening. I did see Tyrina Wingreen Fife across the crowded deck. The publisher turned philanthropist still stood out in a crowd, in her gown made of thousands of silk-thin leather petals, her blue-black hair rising high in a sculpted wave. But the gown was a Tedekai original. The makeup was dramatic but non-interactive, and her appearance was far more subdued than it would have been a mere 5 or 6 decades earlier. I moved in her direction across the crowded floor as guests milled about on the penultimate deck, making raids on the numerous bars and waiting for the call to dine. "Joseph, dear!" cried Wingreen Fife as I closed the last few yards. "How in the world did you get invited to such a dreary function?" I smiled and offered her a glass of champagne. The Dowager Empress of literary fashion knew me only because of her week-long visit to the Esperance Art Festival the previous year, and my friendship with such web-class names as Salmud Brevi III, Milon de Havre, and Rithmet Corber. Tyrina was a dinosaur who refused to become extinct. Her wrists, palms, and neck would have glowed blue from repeated Paulsons if it had not been for makeup, and she spent decades on short-hop interstellar cruises or incredibly expensive cryogenic naps at spas too exclusive to have names. The upshot was that Tyrina Wingreen Fife had held the social scene in an iron grip for more than 3 centuries and showed no signs of relinquishing it. With every 20-year nap, her fortune expanded and her legend grew. Do you still live on that dreary little planet I visited last year? She asked. Esperance, I said, knowing that she knew precisely where each important artist on that unimportant world resided. No, I appear to have moved my residences to TC² for the present. M. Wingreen Fife made a face. I was vaguely aware that there was a group of 8 to 10 hangers-on watching intently, wondering who this brash young man was who had moved into her inner orbit. "How dreadful for you," said Tyrrhena, "to have to abide on a world of business people and government bureaucrats. I hope they allow you to escape soon." I raised my glass in a toast to her. "I wanted to ask you," I said, "weren't you Martin Silenus's editor?" The Dowager Empress lowered her glass and fixed me with a cold stare. For a second I imagined Maynard Gladstone and this woman locked in a combat of wills. I shuddered and waited for her answer. "My darling boy," she said, "that is such ancient history. Why would you bother your pretty young head about such prehistoric trivia?" "I'm interested in Silenus," I said, "in his poetry. I was just curious if you were still in touch with him." Joseph, tutted M. Wingreen Fife. "No one has heard from poor Martin in decades. Why, the poor man would be ancient." I didn't point out to Tyrrhena that when she was Silenus's editor, the poet was much younger than she. "It is odd that you mention him," she continued. "My old firm, Transline, said recently that they were considering releasing some of Martin's work. I don't know if they ever contacted his estate." "His Dying Earth books?" I said, thinking of the old Earth nostalgia volumes which had sold so well so long ago. "No, oddly enough. I believe they were thinking of printing his cantos," said Tyrrhena. She laughed and held out a cannabis stick, ensconced in a long ebony cigarette holder. One of her retinue hurried to light it. "Such an odd choice," she said, "considering that no one ever read the cantos when poor Martin was alive. Well, nothing helps an artist's career more than a little death and obscurity, I always say." She laughed, sharp little sounds like metal chipping rock. Half a dozen of her circle laughed along with her. "You'd better make sure that Silenus is dead," I said. "The cantos would make better reading if they were complete." Tyrrhena Wingreen Fife looked at me strangely. The chimes for dinner sounded through shifting leaves. Spencer Reynolds offered the grande dame his arm as people began climbing the last staircase toward the stars, and I finished my drink, left the empty glass on a railing, and went up to join the herd. The CEO and her entourage arrived shortly after we were seated, and Gladstone gave a brief talk, probably her 20th of the day, excluding her morning speech to the Senate and the Web. The original reason for tonight's dinner had been the recognition of a fundraising effort for the Armagast Relief Fund, but Gladstone's talk soon turned to the war and the necessity of prosecuting it vigorously and efficiently, while leaders from all parts of the Web promoted unity. I gazed out over the railing while she spoke. The lemon sky had dissolved to a muted saffron, and then quickly faded to a tropical dusk so rich that it seemed as if a thick, blue curtain had been drawn across the sky. God's Grove had 6 small moons, 5 of them visible from this latitude, and 4 were racing across the sky as I watched the stars emerge. The air was oxygen-rich here, almost intoxicating, and carried a heavy fragrance of moistened vegetation, which reminded me of the morning visit to Hyperion. But no EMVs or skimmers or flying machines of any sort were allowed on God's Grove. Petrochemical emissions or fusion cell wakes had never polluted these skies. and the absence of cities, highways, and electrical lighting made the stars seem bright enough to compete with the Japanese lanterns and glow globes hanging from branches and stanchions. The breeze had come up again after sunset, and now the entire tree swayed slightly, the broad platform moving as softly as a ship on a gentle sea, weirwood and muirwood, stanchions and supports creaking softly with gentle swells. With the gentle swells. I could see lights shining up through distant tree tops, and knew that many of them came from rooms, a distant a few of thousands leased by the Templars, which one could add to one's multi-world Farcaster-connected residence, if one had the million-mark beginning price for such an extravagance. The Templars did not sully themselves with the day-to-day operations of treetops or the leasing agencies, merely setting strict, inviolable ecological conditions to any such endeavour, but they benefited from the hundreds of millions of marks brought in by such enterprises. I thought of their interstellar cruise ship, the Yggdrasil, a kilometre-long tree from the planet's most sacred forest, driven by Hawking Drive singularity generators and protected by the most complex force shields and erg force fields that could be carried. Somehow, inexplicably, the Templars had agreed to send the Yggdrasil on an evacuation mission that was a mere cover for the Force Invasion Task Force. And as things tend to happen when priceless objects are set in harm's way, the Yggdrasil was destroyed while in orbit around Hyperion, whether by ouster attack or some other force not yet determined. How had the Templars reacted? What conceivable goal could have made them risk one of the 4 tree ships in existence? And why had their tree ship captain, Het Mastine, been chosen as one of the 7 Shrike pilgrims, and then proceeded to disappear before the wind wagon reached the bridle range on the shores of the Sea of Grass? There were too damned many questions, and the war was only a few days old. Mina Gladstone had finished her remarks and urged us all to enjoy the fine dinner. I applauded politely and waved over a steward to have my wine-glass filled. The first course was a classic salad à la the Empire period, and I applied myself to it with enthusiasm. I realized that I'd eaten nothing since breakfast that day. Spearing a sprig of watercress, I remembered Governor-General Theo Lane eating bacon and eggs and kippers as the rain fell softly from Hyperion's lapis lazuli sky. Had that been a dream?
What do you think of the war, M. Severn?
Asked Reynolds, the action artist. He was several seats down and across the broad table from me, but his voice carried very well. I could see Tyrrhena raise an eyebrow toward me from where she sat, 3 seats to my right. What can one think of war? I said, tasting the wine again. It was quite good, though nothing in the web could match my memories of French Bordeaux. War does not call for judgment, I said, merely survival.
On the contrary, said Reynolds, like so many other things humankind has redefined since the Hegira, warfare is on the threshold of becoming an art form.
An art form, sighed a woman with short-cropped chestnut hair. The datasphere told me she was M. Sudette Scheer, wife of Senator Gabriel Fyodor Kolchev, and a powerful political force in her own right. M. Scheer wore a blue and gold lame gown and an expression of rapt interest. War as an art form, M. Reynolds! What a fascinating concept! Spencer Reynolds was a bit shorter than Webb average, but far handsomer. His hair was curled but cropped short, his skin appeared bronzed by a benevolent sun and slightly gilded with subtle body paint, his clothes and honestry were expensively flamboyant without being outré, and his demeanour proclaimed a relaxed confidence that all men dreamed of and precious few obtained. His wit was obvious, his attention to others sincere, and his sense of humour legendary. I found myself disliking the son of a bitch at once.
Everything is an art form, M. Scheer, M. Severn,
Reynolds smiled.
or must become one. We are beyond the point where warfare can be merely the churlish imposition of policy by other means. Diplomacy, diplomacy, said General Morpurgo on Reynolds' left. I beg your pardon, General? Diplomacy, he said, and its extension of, not imposition of. We are beyond the point where warfare can be merely the churlish imposition of policy by other means. Ha ha. Extension of policy. Right. Spencer Reynolds bowed and made a small roll of his hand. Sudette Chier and Tyrrhena laughed softly. The image of Councillor Albedo leaned forward from my left and said, "Von Clausewitz, I believe." I glanced toward the councillor. A portable projection unit, not much larger than the radiant gossamers flitting through the branches, hovered 2 meters above and behind him. The illusion was not as perfect as in Government House, but it was far better than any private holo I had ever seen. General Morpurgo nodded toward the corps representative. "Whatever," said Shear. "It is the idea of warfare as art which is so brilliant." I finished the salad, and a human waiter whisked the bowl away, replacing it with a dark grey soup I did not recognize. It was smoky, slightly redolent of cinnamon and the sea, and delicious. "Warfare is the perfect medium for an artist," began Reynolds, holding his salad utensil aloft like a baton, "and not merely for those craftsmen who have studied the so-called science of war, either." He smiled toward Morpurgo and another force officer on the general's right, dismissing both of them from consideration. "Only someone who is willing to look beyond the bureaucratic limits of tactics and strategies and the obsolescent will to win can truly wield an artist's touch with a medium so difficult as warfare in the modern age." "The obsolescent urged will to win?" said the force officer. The datasphere whispered that he was Commander William Ajunta Lee, a naval Heery of the Maui Covenant conflict. He looked young, middle 50s perhaps, and his rank suggested that his youth was due to years of traveling between the stars rather than Poulsen. "Of course obsolescent," laughed Reynolds. "Do you think a sculptor wishes to defeat the clay? Does a painter attack the canvas? For that matter, does an eagle or Thomas Hawk assault the sky?" "Eagles are extinct," grumbled Morpurgo. "Perhaps they should have attacked the sky. It betrayed them." Reynolds turned back to me. Waiters removed his abandoned salad and brought the soup course I was finishing. "And Severn, you are an artist, an illustrator at least," he said. "Help me explain to these people what I mean." "I don't know what you mean." While I waited for the next course, I tapped my wine-glass. It was filled immediately. From the head of the table, 30 feet away, I could hear Gladstone, Hunt, and several of the Relief Fund chairmen laughing. Spencer Reynolds did not look surprised at my ignorance. "For our race to achieve true Satori, for us to move to that next level of consciousness and evolution so that so many of our philosophies proclaim—" I don't know how to read. "For our race to achieve the true Satori, for us to move to that next level of consciousness and evolution that so many of our philosophies proclaim, all facets of human endeavor must become conscious strivings for art." General Morpurgo took a long drink and grunted. "Including such bodily functions as eating, reproducing, and eliminating waste, I suppose." "Most especially such functions!" exclaimed Reynolds. He opened his hands, offering the long table and its many delights. "What you see here is the animal requirement of turning dead organic compounds to energy, the base act of devouring other life, but Treetops has turned it into art. Reproduction has long since replaced its crude animal origins with the essence of dance for civilized human beings. Elimination must become pure poetry. I'll remember that the next time I go in to take a shit, said Morpurgo.
Tyrrena Wingreen Fife laughed and turned to the man in red and black to her right. Monsignor, your church, Catholic, early Christian, isn't it? Don't you have some delightful old doctrine about mankind achieving a more exalted evolutionary status? We all turned to look at the small, quiet man in the black robe and strange little cap. Monsignor Edouard, a representative of the almost forgotten early Christian sect now limited to the world of Pachem and a few colony planets, was on the guest list because of his involvement with the Armagast Relief Project, and until now he had been quietly applying himself to his soup. He looked up with a slightly surprised look on his face, lined with decades of exposure to weather and worry.
Why, yes, he said. The teachings of St. Teilhard discuss an evolution toward the Omega Point.
And is the Omega Point similar to our Zen Gnostic idea of practical Satori? Asked Sudat Shear. Monsignor Edouard looked wistfully at his soup, as if it were more important than the conversation at that moment.
Not really too similar, he said. St. Teilhard felt that all of life, every level of organic consciousness, was part of a planned evolution toward ultimate mergence with the Godhead. He frowned slightly. The Teilhard position has been modified much over the past 8 centuries, but the common thread has been that we consider Jesus Christ to have been an incarnate example of what that ultimate consciousness might be like on the human plane.
I cleared my throat. Didn't the Jesuit Paul Duret write extensively on the Teilhard hypothesis? Monsignor Edouard leaned forward to see around Tyrrena and looked directly at me. There was surprise on that interesting face.
Why, yes, he said, but I am amazed that you're familiar with the work of Father Duret.
I returned the gaze of the man who had been Duret's friend, even while exiling the Jesuit to Hyperion for apostasy. I thought of another refugee from the New Vatican, young Lenar Hoyt, lying dead in a time tomb while the cruciform parasites carrying the mutated DNA of both Duret and himself carried out their grim purpose of resurrection. How did the abomination of the cruciform fit into Teilhard and Duret's view of inevitable benevolent evolution toward the Godhead? Spencer Reynolds obviously thought that the conversation had been out of his arena for too long.
The point is, he said, his deep voice drowning out the other conversation halfway down the table, that warfare, like religion or any other human endeavor that taps and organizes human energies on such a scale, must abandon its infantile preoccupation with the ding and sich literalism, usually expressed through a slavish fascination with goals, and revel in the artistic dimension of its own oeuvre. Now, my own most recent project.
And what is your cult's goal, Monsignor Edouard? Tyrrena Wingreen Fife asked, stealing the conversation ball away from Reynolds without raising her voice or shifting her gaze from the cleric.
To help mankind to know and serve God, he said, and finished his soup with an impressive slurp.
The archaic little priest looked down the table toward the projection of Councillor Albedo.
I've heard rumors, Councillor, that the Technocorps is pursuing an oddly similar goal. Is it true that you are attempting to build your own god?
Albedo's smile was perfectly calculated to be friendly with no sign of condescension. It is no secret that elements of the Corps have been working for centuries to create at least a theoretical model of a so-called artificial intelligence far beyond our own poor intellects. He made a deprecating gesture. It is hardly an attempt to create God, Monsignor. More in the line of a research project exploring the possibilities your St. Teilhard and Father Duret pioneered.
But you believe that it's possible to orchestrate your own evolution to such a higher consciousness? Asked Commander Lee, the naval hero, who had been listening attentively. Design an ultimate intelligence the way we once designed your crude ancestors out of silicon and microchips? Albedo laughed. Nothing so simple or grandiose, I'm afraid. And when you say you, Commander, please remember that I am but one personality in an assemblage of intelligences no less diverse than the human beings on this planet. Indeed, in the web itself. The core is no monolith. There are as many camps of philosophies, beliefs, hypotheses, religions, if you will, as there would be in any diverse community. He folded his hands as if enjoying an inside joke. Although I prefer to think of the quest for an ultimate intelligence as a hobby more than a religion, rather like building ships in a bottle, Commander, or arguing over how many angels you would fit on the head of a pin, Monsignor. As the world burns down behind me. The group laughed politely, except for Reynolds, who was... I'm going to try that sentence again, actually, or quote again, because I kept getting distracted. Although I prefer to think of the quest for an ultimate intelligence as a hobby more than a religion, rather like building ships in a bottle, Commander, or arguing over how many angels would fit on the head of a pin, Monsignor. The group laughed politely, except for Reynolds, who was frowning unintentionally as he no doubt pondered how to regain control of the conversation. And what about the rumor that the Corps has built a perfect replica of old Earth in the quest for an ultimate intelligence? I asked, amazing myself with the question. Albedo's smile did not falter. The friendly gaze did not quiver, but there was a nanosecond of something conveyed through the projection. What? Shock? Fury? Amusement? I had no idea. He could have communicated with me privately during that eternal second, transmitting immense quantities of data via my own core umbilical or along the unseen corridors we have reserved for ourselves in the labyrinthine datasphere which humankind thought so simply contrived. Or he could have killed me, pulling rank with whatever gods of the core controlled the environment for a consciousness like mine. It would have been as simple as the director of an institute calling down to order the technicians to permanently anesthetize an obnoxious laboratory mouse. Conversation had halted up and down the table. Even Mina Gladstone and her cluster of ultra VIPs glanced down our way. Councillor Albedo smiled more broadly. What a delightfully odd rumor! Tell me, M. Severn, how does anyone, especially an organism such as the Core, which your own commentators have called a disembodied bunch of brains, runaway programs that have escaped their circuits and spent most of their time pulling intellectual lint out of their non-existent navels, how does anyone build a perfect replica of old Earth? I looked at the projection, through the projection, realizing for the first time that Albedo's dishes and dinner were also projected. He had been eating while we spoke. And, he continued, obviously deeply amused, has it occurred to the promulgators of this rumor that a perfect replica of old Earth would be old Earth to all intents and purposes? What possible good would such an effort do in exploring the theoretical possibilities of an enhanced artificial intelligence matrix? When I did not answer, an uncomfortable silence settled over the entire midsection of the table. Monsignor Edouard cleared his throat. "It would seem," he said, "that any society that could produce an exact replica of any world, but especially a world destroyed these 4 centuries, would have no need to seek God. It would be God." "Precisely," laughed Councillor Albedo. "It's an insane rumor, but delightful. Absolutely delightful."
Relieved laughter filled the whole of silence. Spencer Reynolds began telling about his next project, an attempt to have suicides coordinate their leaps from bridges on a score of worlds while the All-Thing watched, and Tyrena Wingreen Fife stole all attention by putting her arm around Monsignor Edouard and inviting him to her after-dinner nude swimming party at her floating estate on Mare Infinitus. I saw Councillor Albedo staring at me, turned in time to see an inquisitive glance from Leigh Hunt and the CEO, and swiveled to watch the waiters bring up the entrees on silver platters. The dinner was excellent.
Chapter 15. I did not go to Tyrena's nude swimming party, nor did Spencer Reynolds, whom I last saw speaking earnestly with Sudette Shear. I do not know whether Monsignor Edouard gave in to Tyrena's enticements. Dinner was not quite over. Relief Fund chairpeople were giving short speeches, and many of the more important senators had already begun to fidget when Leigh Hunt whispered to me that the CEO's party was ready to leave, and my presence was requested. It was almost 2300 hours Web Standard Time, and I assumed the group would be returning to Government House. But when I stepped through the one-time portal, I was the last in the party to do so, except for the Praetorian bodyguards bringing up the rear of the group. I was shocked to be looking down a stone-walled corridor relieved by long windows showing a Martian sunrise. Technically, Mars is not in the web. The oldest extraterrestrial colony of humankind is made deliberately difficult to reach. Zen Gnostic pilgrims traveling to the Master's Rock in Hellas Basin have to cast to the home system station and take shuttles from Ganymede or Europa to Mars. It is an inconvenience of only a few hours, but to a society where everything is literally 10 steps away, it makes for a sense of sacrifice and adventure. Other than for historians and experts in brandy cactus agriculture, there are few professional reasons to be drawn to Mars. With the gradual decline of Zen Gnosticism during the past century, even the pilgrim traffic there has grown lighter. No one cares for Mars, except for Force, although the Force administrative offices are on TC squared and the bases are spread throughout the Web and Protectorate. Mars remains the true home of the military organization, with the Olympus Command School as the heart. There was a small group of military VIPs waiting to greet the small group of political VIPs, and while the clusters swirled like colliding galaxies, I walked over to a window and stared. The corridor was part of a complex carved into the upper lip of Mons Olympus, and from where we stood, some 10 miles high, it felt as if one could take in half the planet with a single glance. From this point, the world was the ancient shield volcano, and the trick of distance reduced access roads, the old city along the cliff walls, and the Tharsis Plateau slums and forests to mere squiggles in a red landscape which looked unchanged from the time the first humans set foot on that world, proclaimed it for a nation called Japan, and snapped a photograph. I was watching a small sunrise, thinking, that is the sun, enjoying the incredible play of light on the clouds creeping out of darkness up the side of the interminable mountainside, when Leigh Hunt stepped closer.
The CEO will see you after the conference.
He handed me 2 sketchbooks, which one of the aides had brought from Government House.
You realize everything you hear and see in this conference is highly classified?
I did not treat the statement as a question. Wide bronze doors opened in the stone walls, and guide lights switched on, showing the carpeted ramp and staircase leading to the war room table in the center of a wide, black place, which might have been a massive auditorium sunk in a darkness absolute except for the single small island of illumination. Aides hurried to show the way, pull out chairs, and blend back into the shadows. With reluctance, I turned my back on the sunrise and followed our party into the pit. General Morpurgo and a troika of other force leaders handled this briefing personally. The graphics were light years away from the crude call-ups and hollows of the government house briefing. We were in a vast space, large enough to hold all 8,000 cadets and staff when required, but now most of the blackness above us was filled with Omega-quality hollows and diagrams the size of free-ball fields. It was frightening in a way. So was the content of the briefing.
We're losing the struggle in Hyperion's system, Morpurgo concluded. At best we will achieve a draw, with the Youster swarm held at bay beyond a perimeter some 15 AU from the Farcaster. I can't turn pages fast enough. At best we will achieve a draw, with the Youster swarm held at bay beyond a perimeter some 15 AU from the Farcaster singularity sphere, with attrition from their small ship raids a constant source of harassment. At worst, we will have to fall back to defensive positions, while we evacuate the fleet and hegemony citizens and allow Hyperion to fall into Ouster hands.
What happened to the knockout blow we were promised? Asked Senator Kolchev from his place near the head of the diamond-shaped table. The decisive attacks on the swarm. Morpurgo cleared his throat, but glanced at Admiral Nishita, who rose. The Force Space Commander's black uniform left the illusion of only his scowling face floating in the darkness. I felt a tug of déjà vu at the thought of that image, but I looked back at Mina Gladstone, illuminated now by the war charts and colours floating above us like a holospectrum version of Damocles' famous sword, and commenced drawing again. I had put away the paper sketchpad, and now used my light stylus on a flexible call-up sheet.
First, our intelligence on the swarms was necessarily limited, began Nishita.
Graphics changed above us.
Recon probes and long-distance scouts could not tell us the full nature of every unit in the Ouster migration fleet. The result has been an obvious and serious underestimation of actual combat strength in this particular swarm. Our efforts to penetrate swarm defenses using only long-range attack fighters and torch ships has not been as successful as we had hoped. Second, the requirement of maintaining a secure defensive perimeter of such a magnitude in the Hyperion system has made such demands on our two operative task forces that it has been impossible to devote sufficient numbers of ships to an offensive capability at this time.
Kolchev interrupted. Admiral, what I hear you saying is that you have too few ships to carry out the mission of destroying or beating off this Ouster attack on Hyperion system. Is that correct? Nishita stared at the senator, and I was reminded of paintings I had seen of samurai in the seconds before the killing sword was removed from its scabbard.
That is correct, Senator Kolchev.
Yet in our war cabinet briefings as recently as a standard week ago, you assured us that the two task forces would be enough to protect Hyperion from invasion or destruction, and to deliver a knockout blow to this Ouster swarm. What happened, Admiral? Nishita drew himself up to his full height, greater than Morpurgo's, but still shorter than Webb average, and turned his gaze toward Gladstone.
Executive, I have explained the variables that require alteration in our battle plan. Shall I begin this briefing again?
Mina Gladstone had her elbow on the table, and her right hand supported her head with 2 fingers against her cheek, 2 under her chin, and a thumb along her jawline in a posture of tired attention.
Admiral, she said softly, while I believe Senator Kolchev's question is totally pertinent, I think that the situation you have outlined in this briefing and earlier ones today answers it.
She turned toward Kolchev.
Gabriel, we guessed wrong. With this commitment of force, we get a stalemate at best. The Ousters are meaner, tougher, and more numerous than we thought.
She turned her tired gaze toward Nishita.
Admiral, how many more ships will you need?
Nishita took a breath, obviously thrown off stride at being asked this question so early in the briefing. He glanced at Morpurgo and the other joint chiefs and then folded his hands in front of his crotch like a funeral director.
200 warships, he said. At least 200. It is a minimum number.
A stir went through the room. I looked up from my drawing. Everyone was whispering or changing position except Gladstone. It took a second for me to understand. The entire Force Space fleet of warships numbered fewer than 600. Of course, each was hideously expensive. Few planetary economies could afford to build more than one or two interstellar capital ships, and even a handful of torch ships equipped with Hawking drives could bankrupt a colonial world. And each was hideously powerful. An attack carrier could destroy a world. A force of cruisers and spinship destroyers could destroy a sun. It was conceivable that the hegemony ships already massed in Hyperion system could, if vectored through the Force Large Transit Farcaster matrix, destroy most of the star systems in the web. It had taken fewer than 50 ships of the type Nishita was requesting to destroy the Glennon Height fleet a century earlier and to quell the mutiny forever. But the real problem behind Nishita's request was the commitment of 2/3 of the hegemony's fleet in the Hyperion system at one time. I could feel the anxiety flow through the politicians and policymakers like an electrical current. Senator Richaud from Renaissance Vector cleared her throat. Admiral, we've never concentrated fleet forces like that before, have we? Nishita's head pivoted as smoothly as if it were on bearings. The scowl did not flicker.
We have never committed ourselves to a fleet action of this importance to the future of the hegemony, Senator Richaud.
Yes, I understand that, said Richaud, but my question was meant to ask what impact this would have on web defenses elsewhere. Isn't that a terrible gamble? Nishita grunted, and the graphics in the vast space behind him swirled, misted, and coalesced as a stunning view of the Milky Way galaxy, as seen from far above the plane of ecliptic. The angle changed as we seemed to rush at dizzying speed toward one spiral arm, until the blue latticework of the Farcaster web became visible. The hegemony, an irregular gold nucleus with spires and pseudopods extending into the green nimbus of the Protectorate. The web seemed both random in design and dwarfed by the sheer size of the galaxy, and both of these impressions were accurate reflections of reality. Suddenly, the graphic shifted, and the web and colonial worlds became the universe, except for a spattering of a few hundred stars to give it perspective.
These represent the position of our fleet elements at this time, said Admiral Nishita, amidst the... I don't know why I'm having trouble today. I'm so sorry, guys. Amidst and beyond the gold and green, several hundred specks of intense orange appeared. The heaviest concentration was around a distant Protectorate star I recognized belatedly as Hyperions. And these the ouster swarms as of their most recent plottings. A dozen red lines appeared, vector signs and blue shift tails showing the direction of travel. Even at this scale, none of the swarm vectors appeared to intersect hegemony space except for the swarm, a large one, that seemed to be curving into Hyperion's system. I noticed that Force space deployments frequently reflected swarm vectors, except for the clusterings near bases and troublesome worlds such as Maui Covenant, Brescia, and Comriad.
Admiral, said Gladstone, preempting any description of these deployments, I presume you have taken into account fleet reaction time should there be a threat to some other point on our frontier.
Nishita's scowl twitched into something that might have been a smile. There was a hint of condescension in his voice.
Yes, CEO. If you notice the closest swarms besides the one at Hyperion...
The view zoomed toward red vectors above a gold cloud, which embraced star systems I was fairly certain included Heaven's Gate, God's Grove, and Mare Infinitus. At this scale, the ouster threat seemed very distant indeed.
We plot the swarm migrations according to Hawking Drive wakes picked up by listening posts and beyond the web. In and beyond the web, We plot the swarm migrations according to the Hawking Drive wakes picked up by listening posts in and beyond the web. In addition, our long-distance probes verify swarm size and direction on a frequent basis.
How frequent, Admiral? Asked Senator Kolchev.
At least once every few years, snapped the Admiral. You must realize that travel time is many months, even at spinship velocities, and the time that from our viewpoint may be as much as 12 years for such a transit.
With gaps of years between direct observations, persisted the Senator, how do you know where the swarms are at any given time?
Hawking drives do not lie, Senator.
Nishita's voice was absolutely flat.
It is impossible to simulate the Hawking distortion wake. What we are looking at is the real-time location of hundreds, or in the case of larger swarms, thousands, of singularity drives on the way. As with fatline broadcasts, there is no time debt for transmission of the Hawking effect.
Yes, said Kolchev, his voice as flat and deadly as the Admiral's. But what if the swarms were traveling at less than spinship velocities? Nishita actually smiled.
Below hyperlight velocities, Senator?
Yes. I could see Morpurgo and a few of the other military men shake their heads or hide smiles. Only the young Force C commander, William Ahunta Lee, leaning forward attentively with a serious expression.
At sublight velocities, deadpanned Admiral Nishita, our great-great-grandchildren might have to worry about warning their grandchildren of an invasion.
Kolchev would not desist. He stood and pointed toward where the closest swarm curved away from the hegemony above Heaven's Gate. What about if this swarm were to approach without Hawking drives? Nishita sighed, obviously irritated at having the substance of the meeting suborned by irrelevancies.
Senator, I assure you that if the swarm turned their drives off now and turned toward the web now, it would be...
Nishita's eyes blinked as he consulted his implants and comlinks.
230 standard years before they approached our frontiers. It is not a factor in this decision, Senator.
Mina Gladstone leaned forward, and all eyes shifted toward her. I stored my previous sketch in the call-up and started a new one.
Admiral, it seems to me the real concern here is both the unprecedented nature of this concentration of forces near Hyperion and the fact that we're putting all of our eggs in one basket.
There was a murmur of amusement around the table. Gladstone was famous for aphorisms, stories, and clichés so old and forgotten that they were brand new. This might have been one of them.
Are we putting all of our eggs in one basket? She continued.
Nishita stepped forward and set his hands on the table, long fingers extended, pressing down with great intensity. That intensity matched the power of the small man's personality. He was one of those rare individuals who commanded others' attention and obedience without effort.
No, CEO, we are not.
Without turning, he gestured toward the display above and behind him.
The closest swarms could not approach hegemony space without a warning time of 2 months in Hawking Drive. That is 3 years of our time. It would take our fleet units in Hyperion, even assuming they were widely deployed and in a combat situation, less than 5 hours to fall back and translate anywhere in the web.
That does not include fleet units beyond the web, said Senator Richow. The colonies cannot be left unprotected. Nishita gestured again.
The 200 warships we will call in to make the Hyperion campaign decisive are those already within the web or those carrying jump ship Farcaster capabilities. None of the independent fleet units assigned to the colonies will be affected.
Gladstone nodded.
But what if the Hyperion portal were damaged or seized by the ousters?
From the table, nodding and exhalations from the civilians around the table. I get from the shifting, nodding, and exhalations from the civilians around the table, I guessed that she had hit upon the major concern. Nishita nodded and strode back to the small dais as if this were the question he had been anticipating, and was pleased irrelevancies were at an end.
Excellent question, he said. It has been mentioned in previous briefings, but I will cover this possibility in some detail. First, we have redundancy in our Farcaster capability, with no fewer than 2 jump ships in system at this time, and plans for 3 more when the reinforced task force arrives. The chances of all 5 of these ships being destroyed are very, very small, almost insignificant when one considers our enhanced defensive capabilities with the reinforced task force. Second, chances of ousters seizing an intact military Farcaster and using it to invade the web are nil. Each ship, each individual that transits a force portal must be identified by tamper-proof coded microtransponders, which are updated daily.
Couldn't the ousters break these codes? Insert their own? Asked Senator Kolchev.
Impossible.
Nishita was striding back and forth on the small dais, hands behind his back.
The updating of codes is done daily via Fatline one-time pads from Force headquarters within the web.
Excuse me, I said, amazed to hear my own voice here, but I made a brief visit to Hyperion system this morning and was aware of no codes. Heads turned. Admiral Nishita again carried out his successful impression of an owl turning its head on frictionless bearings.
Nonetheless, M7, he said, you and M. Hunt were encoded, painlessly and unobtrusively by infrared lasers, at both ends of the Farcaster transit.
I nodded, amazed for a second that the Admiral had remembered my name, until I realized that he also had implants.
Third,
continued Nishita as if I had not spoken,
should the impossible happen and the ouster forces overwhelm our defenses, capture our Farcasters intact, circumvent the failsafe transit code systems, and activate a technology with which they are not familiar, and which we have denied them for more than 4 centuries, then all their efforts would still be for naught, because all military traffic is being routed to Hyperion via a base at Madhya.
Where? Came a chorus of voices. I had heard of Madhya only through Braun Lamia's tale of her client's death. Both she and Nishita pronounce it as Madhya. Madhya.
Madhya,
repeated Admiral Nishita, smiling now in earnest. It was an oddly boyish smile.
Do not query your comlogs, gentlemen and ladies. Madhya is a black system, not found in any inventories or civilian Farcaster charts. We reserve it for just such purposes. With only one habitable planet, fit only for mining and our bases, Madhya is the ultimate fallback position. Excuse me. Should ouster warships do the impossible and breach our defenses and portals in Hyperion, the only place they can go is Madhya, where significant amounts of automated firepower are directed toward anything and everything that comes through. Should the impossible be squared and their fleet survive transit to the Madhya system, outgoing Farcaster connections would automatically self-destruct, and their warships would be stranded years from the web.
Yes, said Senator Richaud, but so would ours. 2/3 of our fleet would be left in Hyperion system. Nishita stood at parade rest.
This is true, he said, and certainly the Joint Chiefs and I have weighed the consequences of this remote, one would have to say statistically impossible, event many times. We find the risks acceptable. Should the impossible happen, we still would have more than 200 warships in reserve to defend the web. At worst, we would have lost the Hyperion system after dealing a terrible blow to the ousters, one which would, in and of itself, almost certainly deter any future aggression. But this is not the outcome we anticipate. With 200 warships transferred soon, within the next 8 standard hours, our predictors and the AI Advisory Council predictors, Our predictors and the AI Advisory Council predictors see a 99% probability of total defeat of the aggressive Ouster swarm with inconsequential losses to our forces.
Mina Gladstone turned toward Councillor Albedo. In the low light, the projection was perfect.
Counselor, I did not know that the advisory group had been asked this question. Is the 99% probability figure reliable?
Albedo smiled. Quite reliable, CEO, and the probability factor was 99.962794%. The smile broadened. Quite reassuring enough to have one put all one's eggs into one basket for a short while. Gladstone did not smile.
Admiral, how long after you get the reinforcements do you see the fighting going on?
1 standard week, CEO, at the most.
Gladstone's left eyebrow rose slightly.
So short a time?
Yes, CEO.
General Morpurgo, thoughts from Force Ground?
We concur, CEO. Reinforcement is necessary, and at once. Transports will carry approximately 100,000 Marines and ground troops for the mopping up in the remnants of the swarm.
In 7 standard days or less?
Yes, CEO.
Admiral Singh?
Absolutely necessary, CEO.
General Van Zyte?
One by one, Gladstone polled the Joint Chiefs and top-ranking military there, even asking the Commandant of the Olympus Command School, who swelled with pride at being consulted. One by one, she received their unequivocal advice to reinforce.
Commander Lee?
All gazes shifted toward the young naval officer. I noticed the stiffness of posture and scowls of the senior military men, and suddenly realized that Lee was there at the invitation of the CEO, rather than the benevolence of his superiors. I remembered that Gladstone had been quoted as saying that young Commander Lee showed the kind of initiative and intelligence which force had sometimes lacked. I suspected that the man's career was forfeit for attending this meeting. Commander William Ahunta Lee shifted uncomfortably in his comfortable chair.
With all due respect, CEO, I'm a mere junior naval officer, and I am not qualified to give an opinion on matters of such strategic importance.
Gladstone did not smile. Her nod was almost imperceptible.
I appreciate that, Commander. I am sure your superiors here do also. However, in this case, I wonder if you would indulge me and comment on the issue at hand.
Lee sat upright. For an instant his eyes held both conviction and the desperation of a small, trapped animal.
Well then, CEO, if I must comment, I have to say that my own instincts, and they are only instincts, I am profoundly ignorant of interstellar tactics, would advise me against this reinforcement.
Lee took a breath.
This is a purely military assessment, CEO. I know nothing of the political ramifications of defending Hyperion system.
Gladstone leaned forward.
Then, on a purely military basis, Commander, why do you oppose the reinforcements?
From where I sat, half a table away, I could feel the impact of the Force Chief's gazes like one of the 100 million joule laser blasts used to ignite deuterium-tritium spheres in one of the ancient inertial confinement fusion I think it's supposed to be internal confinement. Inertial confinement fusion reactors. I was amazed that Lee did not collapse, implode, ignite, and fuse before our very eyes.
On a military basis, Lee said, his eyes hopeless but his voice steady, the 2 biggest sins one can commit are to divide one's forces and to, as you put it, CEO, put all of your eggs in a single basket. And in this case, the basket is not even of our own making.
Gladstone nodded and sat back, steepling her fingers beneath her lower lip.
Commander,
said General Morpurgo, and I discovered that a word could indeed be spat.
Now that we have the benefit of your advice, could I ask if you have ever been involved in a space battle?
No, sir.
Have you ever been trained for a space battle, Commander?
Except for the minimal amount required in OCS, which amounts to a few history courses. No, sir, I have not.
Have you ever been involved in any strategic planning above the level of... How many naval surface ships did you command on Maui Covenant, Commander?
1, sir.
1, breathed Morpurgo. A large ship, Commander?
No, sir.
Were you given command of this ship, Commander? Did you earn it, or did it fall to you through the vicissitudes of war?
Our captain was killed, sir. I took command by default. It was the final naval action of the Maui Covenant campaign, and
that will be all, Commander.
Morpurgo turned his back on the war hero and addressed the CEO.
Do you wish to poll us again, ma'am?
Gladstone shook her head. Senator Kolchev cleared his throat. Perhaps we should have a closed cabinet meeting at Government House?
No need, said Mina Gladstone. I've decided. Admiral Singh, you are authorized to divert as many fleet units to the Hyperion system as you and the Joint Chiefs see fit.
Yes, CEO.
Admiral Nishita, I will expect a successful termination of hostilities within 1 standard week of the time you have adequate reinforcements.
She looked around the table. Ladies and gentlemen, I cannot stress to you enough the importance of our possession of Hyperion and the deterrent of ouster threats once and for all. She rose and walked to the base of the ramp leading up and out into the darkness. Good evening, gentlemen, ladies. It was almost 0400 hours Webb and Tau Ceti Center time when Hunt rapped at my door. I'd been fighting sleep for the 3 hours since we cast back. I had just decided that Gladstone had forgotten about me and was beginning to doze when the knock came.
"The garden," said Leigh Hunt, "and for God's sake tuck your shirt in."
The boots made soft noises on the fine gravel of the path as I wandered the dark lanes. The lanterns and glow globes barely emitted light. The stars were not visible above the courtyard because of the glare of TC Squared's interminable cities, but the running lights of the orbital habitations moved across the sky like an endless ring of fireflies. Gladstone was sitting on the iron bench near the bridge.
M7, she said, her voice low. Thank you for joining me. I apologize for it being so late. The cabinet meeting just broke up.
I said nothing and remained standing.
I wanted to ask about your visit to Hyperion this morning.
She chuckled in the darkness.
Yesterday morning. Do you have any impressions?
I wondered what she meant. My guess was that the woman had an insatiable appetite for data, no matter how seemingly irrelevant. I did meet someone, I said.
Oh?
Yes, Dr. Emilio Arundez. He is,
a friend of M. Weintraub's daughter, finished Gladstone. The child who is aging backward. Do you have any updates on her condition?
Not really, I said. I had a brief nap today, but the dreams were fragmented.
And what did the meeting with Dr. Arundez accomplish?
I rubbed my chin with fingers suddenly gone cold. His research team has been waiting in the capital for months, I said. They may be our only hope of understanding what's going on with the tombs and the Shrike.
Our predictors say that it is important that the pilgrims be left alone until their act is played out,
came Gladstone's voice in the darkness. She seemed to be looking to the side, toward the stream. I felt sudden, inexplicable, implacable anger surge through me. Father Hoyt is already played out, I said more sharply than I intended. They could have saved him if the ship had been allowed to rendezvous with the pilgrims. Arundez and his people might have been able to save the baby. Might be able to save the baby, Rachel, even though there are only a few days left.
Less than 3 days, said Gladstone. Was there anything else? Any impressions of the planet or Admiral Nishita's command ship which you found interesting?
My hands clenched into fists, relaxed. You won't allow Rundes to fly up to the tombs? Not now, no. What about the evacuation of civilians from Hyperion? At least the hegemony citizens.
That is not a possibility at this time.
I started to say something, checked myself. I stared at the sound of the water beneath the bridge.
No other impressions, M. Severn?
No.
Well, I wish you a good night and pleasant dreams. Tomorrow may be a very hectic day, but I do want to talk to you about those dreams at some point.
Good night, I said, and turned on my heel and walked quickly back to my wing of the government house. In the darkness of my room, I called up a Mozart sonata and took three... Yes. I called up a Mozart sonata and took 3 trisecobarbitals. Most probably they would knock me out in a drugged, dreamless sleep, where the ghost of dead Johnny Keats and his even more ghostly pilgrims could not find me. It meant disappointing Mina Gladstone, and that did not dismay me in the least. I thought of Swift's sailor, Gulliver, and his disgust with mankind after his return from the land of the intelligent horses, the Huyhns. I don't know how to pronounce that out loud, but it's Houyhnhnms. A disgust with his own species, which grew to the point that he had to sleep in the stables with the horses just to be reassured by their smell and presence. My last thought before sleep was, to hell with Mina Gladstone, to hell with the war, and to hell with the web. And to hell with dreams. And that'll be it for this week. Next week we start part 2. And we'll find out if taking those drugs will actually work for him. My guess is probably, maybe, we'll find out. Do drugs work in super future science space? I don't know. But yeah, hope people are digging it. Sorry it was rougher than I would have liked. Not sure why. Brain in a weird spot? I don't know. Sometimes it's harder than others. Also, a lot of it was from Keats's perspective, so I'm having to change between voices that are not my own rather frequently. It's one thing if you're able to switch between character voices while your own is the narrative voice, but when it's someone else's, it's a bit tricky. Or I find it a bit tricky. Maybe other people have an easier time, people who are actual professionals who get paid for this. And that is your casual reminder that I do not do this professionally. This is a ramshackle operation that I do as a hobby because it's fun. I do these live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, starting at about noon Eastern Standard Time, East Coast US time, whatever you prefer. And I read stuff aloud. If you're tuning in after the fact, you can check those out. Otherwise, it's all saved on my YouTube channel. And usually around the end or beginning of every month, I do a quick organization to make sure everything is in its proper. Any new stuff that I've done in that month, intervening month, is in its proper playlist. Otherwise, they're all there under live, not videos. I realize that's confusing, but that's how it is. It even throws me sometimes when I'm like, where the hell is that? I don't know where it is. It's not under videos. It's because it's under live. Anyway, that'll do it. Hopefully people enjoyed. If you didn't, sorry. If you did, cool. Stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. I'll see you all later. Well, I'll see you all Monday with any luck. All right, toodles. Have a good one. Bye-bye. It's been fun. Until next time.